haven't done the best job preserving my Stormblood playthrough. I forgot to save an entire stream about the Azim step. Then my last stream just had no microphone audio saved. So I thought that I would make a video covering what happened in the conclusion, as well as my feelings on the expansion in general. Enjoy! Stormblood boils down to helping our allies on two fronts. On one, we have the Kingdom of Doma, which has been under Garlean rule for about 25 years. When the Garleans invaded, Lord Kayan chose to abdicate the throne to protect his people. He was appointed deputy viceroy, and then he was murdered because he was secretly leading the resistance movement. Here, we help our friends Yugiri and Gosetsu search for their Lord Hien, the son of Kayan, in the hopes of reviving the Doman resistance. On the other front, we have Alamigo, which has been under imperial rule for about 20 years after they overthrew a mad king, classic, and the Garleans took advantage of the ensuing instability. The plight of Alamigo and her refugees has been simmering in the background since A Realm Reborn. It's been this generic fantasy refugee problem, with a lot of folks speaking real comfortably about what they think those people are like. We've met a lot of Alamigans though, including General Roban from Ul'dah, and notably our friend and fellow scion, Lyse. Along the way, we also meet the Garlean legatus, who's been appointed viceroy of these two occupied territories. It's Xenos, baby, and he is a certified freak. Working under him, we have two sides of the same coin. Yotsuyu, a native Doman who takes great pleasure in torturing her countrymen, at one point forcing a child to shoot his best friend, then laughing when he does and demanding that he kill his parents too. We also have Fordola, a native Alamigan who somehow believes that the Garleans will respect her and not think that she's a dog if she just works hard enough and gains enough power. Where Yotsuyu becomes a collaborator because she bitterly wants to see her fellow Domans suffer, Fordola seems to genuinely believe that resistance is futile and that through collaboration she can gain enough power to lift up her people. So, starting with the last chapter, Doma has been freed, and now it's Alamigo's turn. We've had a few encounters with Xenos up to this point that I have found genuinely chilling.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
He barely moves, and you're just imbued with this sense of utter helplessness, like futility, like I can't do anything in this encounter. Kryl has been abducted, and we discover that she's being studied by this Professor Hojo-like character who wants to know more about the Echo. I'm sure this lore was dropped at some point, but we're reminded that native Garleans lack the genetic markers necessary to manipulate ether, and hence they have no real ability to use magic. They were once oppressed for this, and they fled to the northern continent of Ilsabard, which was replete with ceruleum deposits that enabled their development of magitech technology, which they have in turn used to dominate much of the world now. However, from a scientific racism perspective, magitech armor doesn't address their inherent genetic flaw or weakness, so much like the Alligans before them, the Garleans have turned to human experimentation. This back-alley scientist has developed something called the Resonant, people who are physically altered to the point that they can control and interact with others' ether, like an artificial echo. This is clearly what's going on with Xenos and his otherworldly power, but now Fordola, despite not being Garlean, has received the same treatment as other Resonants, and she can now manipulate others' ether such that she has a kind of future sight and can predict opponents' moves. Fortunately, Urianger shows up out of nowhere and gives us a magic bullet, and we beat her once I figure out how the fuck I'm supposed to use this stupid duty action. We also rescue Kryl. Wait, this is a different game. We rescue Kryl.
Kryl!
I knew you'd come.
It's unclear what type of experiments might have been done to her. She brushes off any concern, but I am very concerned. Back in Ralger's Reach, we're preparing to infiltrate and take back Alamigo. We have a sparring session with Lyse to warm up, but the game cheekily implies with the visuals and chapter title that we did a little more than just spar. We descend on Alamigo, and I got very emotional when Kokobuki from the Thaumaturge Guild showed up. It was so awesome seeing them again after so long. I like that this scene was special for me, but not distracting for anyone else. I remember being annoyed in Heavensward when it was like, oh my god, we need a blood relative of Y'shtola or we won't be able to find her in the live stream. And then her sister shows up out of nowhere, and people in chat were like, oh, you would know her if you had done the Summoner questline. Bullshit. I think they did a much better job giving the Black Mages a bit of fan service here. Fan service that I should learn to appreciate going forward. The endgame dungeon, apart from having some cute references to Final Fantasy VII, was a snooze, and it was very odd that after the scary encounters that I mentioned, we're suddenly able to defeat Xenos no problem. Like, look at this.
Ah, what?
And now, look at this.
Let this moment last forever.
I was absolutely chilling, and it does not feel justified. The trial against Xenos is quite fun though. We discover that he has been hiding the primal Shinryu as a pet. Pretty big for a secret pet. It took me a moment to realize that Xenos truly does have the power of icons, and a Leviathan tidal wave swept most of our party off the platform immediately. I've been playing as a scholar, and I completely forgot to resummon Celine after dying. Just a classic baby scholar moment. But I certainly did better on this than my first blind run of Lakshmi, so yay. It totally made sense to me that Xenos would bring these abilities to bear against us because the Warrior of Light is the Icon Slayer, and he wanted a taste of that, right? But that was the end of Xenos, and Alamigo was finally free. So that was my last stream. Now let's talk about what isn't so great about Stormblood. Keeping in mind that I haven't done the patches yet, I haven't unlocked the raids, I haven't done Eureka. All of that is going to factor into my final estimation, but for now, let's talk about the bad shit. The dungeons in this expansion so far have been very hit or miss. Siren Song Sea and Bardam's Medal were both excellent, some of the best in the game up to this point. But then Castrum Abania and Alamigo were both unchallenging to the point of being actually boring. To the point that I was actually saying that I was bored in the moment. And that's horrible for an endgame dungeon especially. Heavensward's final dungeon, the Etherochemical Research Facility, was way cooler, and the last fight actually whooped my ass a bit. It's not hardcore, but you do need to know the mechanics if you're not a tank. Even something like the Great Kupal Library was more challenging and interesting overall. This is a tricky critique to make, though, because I have to consider that this is an MMO, and some players get mad when they can't see the mechanic right away. Plenty of people are not in the game for difficult content, and they'll stop playing if they get too frustrated. And this game makes money from people continuing to play, so... I don't envy the developers who have to make these balancing decisions. It could be that this is the price that we pay in order to have a more accessible game with things like duty support. It just creates a disconnect when the story is intimating that you're overcoming these great struggles, but you, as a player, aren't struggling at all. Another issue in Stormblood, and one that probably most people can agree to, was the pacing. The story has some uncomfortable stops and starts, and I remember Heavensward suffering from the exact same thing. You scarcely become a ward of House Fortin before you have to go back to Thanalan to save Roban. It feels weird, and there are a number of awkward story beats like that. Sometimes the writers overlap storylines in a way that flows naturally, but there are many instances where they don't, and in my experience this is just a recurring issue in the series so far. I should specify that I'm not talking about the sudden jump from Alamigo to Kugane. That change is very jarring, but it actually serves the story. We're finally starting to see the resistance gaining momentum, but then the Garleans come and raise Ralger's Reach to the ground. It's a hopeless moment, and we have to consider destabilizing Garlemald on a different front instead. This might be a hot take, but I think the swap over to Kugane was a really strong moment for the story, and for characters like Lyse, but I'll get to her later. For an example of the bad pacing, I remember when we meet Sirena for the first time. We arrive on the Azim steppe, we're eager to find Hien and get the Doman Revolution underway, but instead we get this overwhelming info dump like, yes, this tribe is like this, that tribe is like that, and I remember thinking at the time, I don't care about any of that. I did ultimately spend a bit of time getting to know the area through all the various side quests, and that helped me feel more invested, but not everyone is going to do that. This speaks to a core issue where, with such an expansive and ambitious game, it's hard to balance telling a story that stands on its own and is properly motivated, but also isn't a slog to go through. You can have world-building side quests that are really rewarding and interesting for people who want to seek them out, but the main story needs to stand on its own. I don't think they always strike that balance well. Stormblood also had plot devices that were stupid to such an extreme that I was taken out of the story. In particular, there's a moment when we've crossed the Ruby Sea and we're about to pass through the fishing village of Isari and into Yangsha, but we encounter Yotsuyu, who's terrorizing the village people, so Gosatsu steps out and offers himself in exchange for their safety. And I was just like, dude, what the fuck? Like, we have no reason to believe that she would honor any deal to leave the villagers alone. In fact, we should assume the opposite. And then we have no friend to guide us through Yangsha. No one wants to work with us. Gosatsu tells us to contact the Confederacy, and they tell us to go fuck ourselves because they don't want to risk their lives and upset this precarious coexistence that they have with the Empire. The story wouldn't be compelling if everything went smoothly, so this does introduce more conflict, but it was just stupid. And then, of course, in the end, at the exact moment that they're gonna be killed, it's that moment that we bust in and save them with the Confederate pirates who we managed to win over after a couple hours of quests. Similarly, there's a moment when we're gonna go rescue Kryl, and literally, like, Lyse is like taking off her sandals. We're about to dive into that lake, and Urianger just chooses that moment to appear out of nowhere to bring us this etheric siphon that allows us to defeat the otherwise unassailable Fordola. And the game even acknowledges how wild this is afterwards, almost the way a guilty person would try to cover up their tracks. The writers try to assure us that this whole thing was carefully conceived, but it's just stupid. I also felt that the tribal quests of Stormblood were not nearly as strong as the ones in Heavensward. I still enjoyed them, the rewards are cool, but with the Moogle quests, I felt like I was literally repairing a centuries-gone connection between Moogles and dragons and humans. It was really powerful, and it folded in with the story of Ishgard and Izel and Hraesvelgr and Shiva. The Vath Adventurer Guild, in my opinion, was a really lovely story about identity and community, and it gave us a deeper understanding of Nath culture beyond the Ravana story beat. I just haven't felt that same connection from the Stormblood quests. Alba just kind of seems like a rich brat, and I don't feel like I learn very much about the Ananta. Like, what, they need lotion for their scales? Okay. I personally would have loved to know more about the Lupin. They have a very compelling connection to the Kingdom of Doma, but we just don't learn that much about them at all. This isn't really a critique that I can make with my whole chest, though. It's just a big difference that I noticed between the two expansions. I have a more earnest criticism about how the game has started dealing with character death. In particular, we see after the credits roll on Stormblood that Gosatsu and Yotsuyu, who both died in Doma Castle, are actually still alive somewhere. While the fake-out deaths are very classic Final Fantasy, it makes it so hard to feel invested when the stakes have been removed. We had real death with a character like Conrad, but that didn't feel impactful at all because it was so obviously telegraphed. We knew that he would die and that Lyse would step into his leadership role. He literally talked to us about it. There's a difference for me between the outright "they are dead" fake out and just concern. We were concerned for Y'shtola's life in Ralgar's Reach, but I don't think it was implied that she was actually dead. This just felt like a way to add more personal pain to this moment, like, if you don't care about the Alamegan resistance, you at least care about Y'shtola. Likewise, there's a moment where Fordola fires a cannon against her own people, and ours, and there's a vague fear that something might have happened to Alphino, and Alize is losing her mind with worry. The key here is that they're toying with our hearts just a little, and we're experiencing, along with the other characters, the very real concern that we might lose people we care about in this struggle. When we rescue Gusetsu from Yotsuyu, there's this message that it's not his time to die yet. His people are still in chains. Doma's not free. So for me, I felt that when he appeared to die in Doma Castle after allowing the rest of us to escape, his death is so noble and perfect. He has helped his lord achieve the impossible dream of freedom for Doma after 25 long years. I truly fail to see the purpose in giving him this moment and then showing that he's actually still alive at the end. I'm fine with him not being dead. I don't think that death is a necessary endpoint for his character in this story, but why pretend? Why encourage us to mourn? Just why? And this is maybe a good time to talk about Yotsuyu. I had no love or patience for Yotsuyu in my playthrough, but after sitting with it for a bit, she's a pretty compelling villain, because for people of privilege in Doma, Hien, Gusetsu, Yugiri, or even ordinary people who were leading regular lives before the occupation, they're more likely to have this pride in Doma and a desire to see it liberated. For Yotsuyu, though, she lived in Doma, and it wasn't at the hands of the Empire that she suffered. Yotsuyu was despised by her Doman aunt who forced her to do backbreaking labor. Then she was married off to a Doman lord who beat her. And then she was sent to a Doman brothel to work off her husband's debts when he died. And it was through the Doman resistance that she was sent to spy on Xenos and instead decided to work with him, because she feels no loyalty to this nation. Doma was evil to her, the Garleans are evil, who cares? No one cared about her. And that's tragic. It's tragic that no one cared about this child or protected her. And I don't think the game, to this point, has tried to justify her behavior. I think they've just tried to explain it. But I am concerned that she didn't die in Doma Castle. The fake out itself is annoying, but I'm also just not sure if I have an appetite for more Yotsuyu or a Yotsuyu redemption arc. I do believe that redemption is always a good thing, as long as it's earned, but those stories are very hard to do well. It's really hard to center the right ideas and people in those stories. This might be a point where my opinion of the expansion overall might change based on where the story goes from here. At this point, you may be wondering what I actually like about Stormblood. What do I actually like that's enough to overcome all of these complaints? There are a lot of things. A lot of little things. The treasure dungeons are somehow even more fun than in Heavensward. The boss music is my favorite in the game so far. We get a lot of screen time with complex female characters. I have been obsessed with Lyse since the Binding Coils of Bahamut, and she continues to be one of the funniest, smartest, most compassionate characters in the whole game. Her relationship with Alphino is so real and so wholesome. I could go into any of these things at length, but for me, Stormblood was carried by just a couple unique strengths. One of these strengths that struck me from the very beginning and was consistent throughout was the sense of wonder in every new area. In Heavensward, the maps were gray and cold and unwelcoming, and that was appropriate for the expansion and for the culture of Ishgard. It underscored the gravitas of this 1,000-year war, and it also helped emphasize the warmth of characters like Orschfant and Emmerich. You really feel it when you get that hot chocolate. This did mean, though, that exploring didn't exactly leave you gasping in delight. Even bizarre areas like Azizla were less about wide-eyed wonder and more about the abject horrors of the Allegan Empire. Stormblood has you crashing into a ship graveyard, fighting phantoms, and then pushing onto Kugane, which is absolutely stunning. There's even a game mechanic with jump puzzles and vistas that encourages you to really take in this gorgeous world that's been created. The Azim step just takes my breath away every time. I love returning there. The first thing that I did on Dawntrail release day was grab my Namazu quest dailies, and I just sat in the grass and was crafting some shit. I remember stumbling across this extensive fate chain following the Dataki tribe on a series of 13 fates. At one point they set up camp and hang out for 20 minutes, 20 real minutes, and then you have to milk their sheep, and then you're protecting them from wild beasts. And by the end, we had a big group finishing off the final fates together. There's a place in the fringes that you only get sent to for one throwaway side quest. You go to pick some mushrooms in a cave and it's like, oh, okay, I'll go pick your fucking mushrooms. And then you get there and it looks like this. The fuck? And then going under the sea, it was so wonderful. I've heard some critiques that some of these places, especially the Ruby Sea, feel very vast but very empty. And I do think that Final Fantasy XIV as a whole has suffered from this, from certain areas feeling underutilized. But I did the Kojin tribal quests, I did the optional dungeon, Shisui of the Violet Tides. I actually shed tears over this optional side quest about a fisherman in Isari trying to find his path. I've done hunt trains here, I've done spearfishing, I did fate grinds during the Yokai Watch event. The super boss fate was one of the first things that I did on stream. So I understand that type of critique, but I think if you have an issue with that, it's not unique to Stormblood. That's just kind of how the game is, and that's what the side content is for. In addition to this broad sense of wonder, there's a specific reason why Stormblood felt so special to me, and it has to do with current events. We're in a moment where the world seems poised to finally recognize the need for Palestinian liberation, and particularly people in the West is what I'm talking about, because there are many countries where the state of Palestine has been recognized, just not where I'm living. I learned about Israeli apartheid and the occupation of Palestine maybe like 15 years ago, and it's been an issue that I've followed and cared about since then, particularly because it's somehow considered radical in Canada and the United States, and it's often described as being too complicated to talk about when it's really a clear-cut case of a US-backed nuclear power working to exterminate an entire people. The Nakba, the original displacement and genocide of the Palestinian people, happened in 1948, decades before I was ever born. So I'm not super old, but for my entire adult life, I've had a sense for this long period of suffering and injustice. And it's hard for me not to transpose those feelings onto this fictional world where you have both Domans and Alamegans struggling against a violent occupier. I was very invested in both liberation storylines. Lyse is an interesting character, and I understand why some people don't like her. It's strange that she's so light-skinned, it's strange the reveal that she's been cosplaying her sister, and her development in Stormblood felt okay to me, but I understand that it didn't feel that way for everyone. I felt frustrated initially that she didn't recognize how devastated the people of Alamigo were before she got there. She had very naive ideas about how easy it would be to liberate her homeland, but, she didn't live through the occupation herself. And I think it was an intentional choice for her character so that she could experience growth and almost be an audience stand-in for getting a reality check about how tough this whole thing would be. After our hopes are crushed in Ralger's Reach and things are just so bad, Lyse becomes a lot more introspective, and meeting Hien is a really beautiful point for her character as well.
All of Doma is counting on you to finish what we have started. You have it in you, Lyse, to seize the future you want. Never forget.
There's a point where the Mole tribe is having us pick up animal dung for fuel, and you could see this as a silly fetch quest, but we get to speak to the children and get a feel for what's going on. The Mole tribe rescued Hien after the Doman resistance was crushed, and he was truly near death, so he's grown close to these people. And the children are both very sad that Hien intends to leave, and curious about the concept of nation that he won't stop talking about. The people of the Azim Steppe live in a much looser society, so the children don't quite get this concept. I found myself tearing up so badly that it was hard for me to even read the dialogue when Lyse was talking about what nation means to Hien and to her. And again, I can't help but filter it through this real-life lens of the resilience of people like the Palestinians in the face of decades of cruelty and oppression. And I'll be the first to say that it can be clumsy. This story is not perfectly done, but like many of the best parts of Final Fantasy XIV, Stormblood lets you live out this impossible dream. And you could argue that it comes across too much as a pure savior fantasy where you just fix everything, but to me, it's living out this dream where a better world is possible. It gives you hope that you can work with people and make connections and build a resistance that's so powerful that people really can change their circumstances. That these occupations can end and they can begin to rebuild. I was so touched by the final scene of Stormblood with Ehrenwald raising the flag of Alamigo. We had a discussion in chat at one point about patriotism. It's something that I generally find distasteful, like I would never wave a Canadian or an American flag, for example. But patriotism hits very differently when you're talking about an oppressed people. At this point, it's also revealed something that I should have known much earlier. The very gross, clearly fascist song that the Imperial soldiers sing for Xenos near the start of Stormblood, it's actually a co-opted and rewritten version of the Alamigan anthem. I've heard that some find the ending a bit corny and inappropriate, everyone breaking out into song, but not so cinematically, but people really would sing like that in the real world. Revolutionary victories, Union victories, people really do sing. To me, it felt like a deserved celebration, and it was just such a relief. Conflict rarely resolves so cleanly in the real world, justice is so rarely served, but we have to believe that a better world is possible, even if we can't see it yet. Stormblood for me embodies that kind of hope. I don't necessarily believe in having concrete, distinct rankings for the things that I like. I think feelings can change over time or be situational. I wish this weren't the case, but I also find it very hard to divorce expectation or popular opinion from my enjoyment of each expansion. There's this feeling in the community that A Realm Reborn is a slog to be endured in order to get to the good part of the game, but I really enjoyed playing through A Realm Reborn. I could see the serious flaws in the moment, and I can see them even more clearly in retrospect, but I had a really good time. It did a great job introducing me to MMOs, and I was reminded recently how well done the whole murder mystery leading up to Heavensward was. I have an entire video series gushing about how good the binding coils of Bahamut are. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, I enjoyed playing through Heavensward. It is really solid. It also had a strong message of hope and reconciliation, but I did have this nagging feeling like, why isn't this the best thing that I've ever played? Why didn't I cry more? Did I play the game wrong? I remember starting Stormblood with the knowledge that many people do not esteem it highly, or they think that it's just fine. And I was blown away. It's not one of my top 5 games. I can readily enumerate its faults, as you can see, but I love Stormblood. I don't know how much of that comes from lowered expectations relative to Heavensward. I don't know how much of that is specific to my personal politics and how much the theme of liberation resonated with me. But I am willing to die on the hill that this expansion is not bad, and it's not just fine, it's objectively really good. I'm curious how my feelings will change with the post-expansion patches or just with time. I should be getting back to MSQ in the next week or so feel free to drop by the stream, or I'll be putting the recordings here on YouTube as well. Maybe I'll make more videos like this as I play through each expansion. I don't know. I mainly wanted to make up for the fact that my preservation of this whole playthrough was just so scuffed. But that's all from me. Feel free to yell at me in the comments about how much you hate Stormblood.